to the study. Today, let's look at this book about the Knights of Malta, or the Order of St. John. It's a very large book with a soft cover, and we'll be paging through, looking at some of the pictures and doing a little bit of reading. Here you can see what looks to be a manuscript illustration of a boat and some men inside eating a meal. There are some men here with caps and the cross of St. John, which is a white Maltese cross on usually a black or dark background. You can see the crosses here, the ships, and this one with the oars, and the red flag of Malta. So the contents tells us that the book goes through the history of the Order of St. John. The Long Crusade, the Order of St. John in Europe, and charity, because the Order is a charitable organization nowadays. So we start with the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the Levant. Part 1. And there is the charter by Pope Pascal II, recognizing the Hospital of Jerusalem in 1113. This is when abbeys and religious organizations used to provide hospice and medical assistance as well to travelers as well as locals. They would offer lodging and food and a place for prayer. And this is a map of the Crusader states: Antioch, Edessa, Armenia, Tripoli, Jerusalem, and Egypt, and all of the cities associated with the Crusades: Acre, Caesarea, Gaza, Ascalon, Tortosa, Antioch, and Tyre, of classical fame as the capital of Phoenicia. We also have the Crac des Chevaliers, a very famous crusader fortress or castle, and the Kingdom of Cyprus. We have some ruins of the Hospitaller Church city of Jerusalem in the 12th century. The Church of St. John the Baptist in the Hospital of Jerusalem. St. John of Acre, Hospital and Temple, and the Fall of Acre. This chapter is about the Craque des Chevaliers, the most famous Crusader castle called the Crown of Fortresses. At the time, this was the cutting edge of the science of fortification, with its straight walls and guard towers and very high parapets. Besides warring parties, there was also a lot of exchange, culturally, literary, linguistic, scientific, and agricultural, as well as artistic and architectural exchange between the cultures crossing the Levant. But people mostly remember the Crusades because they lasted for so long. And there is the plan of the Craque des Chevaliers there. And the Loggia. So you can see the high pointed arches that were the beginning of the Gothic style. And these points on the arch allowed the windows to be higher. They allowed greater support of the weight above them, unlike the rounded Romanesque arch. There you can see the silhouette of this pointed arch in a view out of the crack towards the hospital. After the fall of Acre, the survivors went to Cyprus, and there they took refuge and watched the fall of the Templar Order, another order of knights, with a very infamous end, because they, one way and another, got on the wrong side of the church or those in charge. Like the Knights of St. John, they had a very extensive network. The Hospitallers, or the Knights of St. John, which would become the Knights of Malta, also were threatened in a similar way, but they were able to survive. This is their castle in Rhodes, what was then Lindos, and here we have a silver coin from one of the Grand Masters of the Order. You can see the writing, which looks very similar to one of the coins I showed you in another video, in style. And there's a knight here with a beard holding a cross, and the knight's cross there, the Knights of St. John. By the 14th century, the knights had established themselves in Rhodes This is a map of Rhodes in 1480. As you can see, near the palace and what the church would have looked like. Here's another photograph of the Crac des Chevaliers as it stands today, and this appears to be a later edition put on by the Turks. Here you can see the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. There is Rhodes there, and the dark islands are the ones controlled by the Hospitallers. They were a military order, like many of the orders that began during the Crusades, and protected Rhodes. Here is a fresco of Niccolo Arenchieri as a young knight, and Grand Master Juan Fernandez de Heredia. This is the castle at Lango. Very large, well-built fortresses. And now we move to the 15th century. The harbour of Rhodes, depicted in 1805. That is the 19th century, but it's the 19th century looking back. And here we have the Auberge of France. So, a place for French travelers to stay, set up by the Hospitallers, the Knights of St. John. This chapter is about the Grand Master Juan Fernandez de Heredia. Or Heredia. He seems to be, or have been, a very bearded, wrinkled man by the time he was Grand Master. We have all kinds of coins. And that's his tomb. So it was a very wealthy and successful order, and also managed to keep its ideal for many years largely intact about providing succor and aid to travelers. Now it is a medical charity. This chapter is about the 3 sieges of Rhodes and how the knights defended Rhodes. The Tower of St. Nicholas. The arms of the Grand Master Aubusson. Another map of the city and its defenses. And there we can see the different areas that were taking refuge on the north coast of Africa. So we're in the Western Mediterranean. as the knights left Rhodes for Malta in the 16th century. And there is the Grand Master Philippe Villiers de Lille, Adam. And another Spanish period of Grand Masters under Charles V, the Emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which at that time included Spain. Very decorative breastplate of the Grand Master. And there are two Grand Masters sitting there. A siege in Malta. Throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, there was a big advancement in siege warfare and siege engines and fortifications. And you can see here in this chapter how the presence of the Knights of St. John, or the Hospitallers, contributed to the development of modern-day Malta. Very luxurious buildings. Grand Master Antonio Manuel de Villena in Floriana. And this is a lovely, lovely illustration of the Grand Master Pierre d'Aubusson among his knights. The Grand Master there. And it's from Caroussin's history that's in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Here you can see a couple of dogs on the floor. One's lying down, little one's playing. The knights are talking. And it appears that this man might have a map he's talking about. Here we have the paintings of St. John the Baptist. This painting is in the oratory of the church. And there's the church of St. John in Malta. Now they talk about the ships of the Order of St. John, which were the strength of this order throughout the Middle Ages. This order was very skilled in shipbuilding and naval warfare. And there we can see early 18th century ships in warfare. And there's Malta and the Western Mediterranean here and the Eastern Mediterranean here, and what became the Ottoman Empire when the Ottoman Turks took over the Ionian Islands from the Venetians. More portraits. And this that we saw on the cover is Prince Zizim and the Knights of Rhodes giving him a dinner on board their ship. Now we come to the Knights, or the Order of St. John in Europe. this is a key to some of the maps of France. And there we have France during the 13th century. So you must remember that during the 13th century this was not all one country as it is today. There's Aquitaine, that for a time belonged to the Kingdom of England. There's Toulouse, that at one point belonged to Aquitaine as well, and at another point to the Franks and Visigoths. And we have the Savoy over here, the Auvergne-Champagne region, and northern France. The Knights of Malta had very close ties to France, where the Templars had more ties to Northern Europe, England and Germany. There were, of course, other orders that had begun during the Crusades, orders of religious knights, none so famous as the Knights of Malta or the Templars. There were also the German Teutonic Order, but like the Templars, it shrunk in time. To survive throughout the centuries, it would become possible to ally oneself with the most powerful secular and religious rulers, as well as control military and monetary facilities. And this is something that the Order of St. John did very well, and survived into the modern era. Now we have the Knights in Spain and Portugal, Castile and Leon, or Leon, Navarre, Catalonia, Aragon, it was a different world in the feudal era. You can see the Romanesque arches on this church tower of San Juan de los Panetes in Saragossa. Saragossa of Song of Roland fame. An altarpiece here and a royal convent. Some windmills in Castile. And this castle was rebuilt by the Hospitallers in 1183. So we have more Romanesque arches. And the tomb of Juan Luis de Vergara, a Knight Hospitaller. Valle Antonio Valdez, painted by Goya. And in Siena, the prioress and 7 nuns, which was an institution established by the Infanta Blanca in the 14th century, and survived until the destruction of the convent German nation, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and part of the Norman Empire. That's Naples, Sicily, Messina, Sardinia, Corsica, Lombardy, Venice, Florence, Lazio, and Rome. This is when Malta began to speak Italian, or Italian became the most spoken language in Malta. Italian influence, and here is the Prior of Venice, Ranuzio Farnese, the grandson of Pope Paul III. At 11, in 1542, painted by Titian. His beautiful doublet and cape with the cross of his order of St. John. The baptism by St. John the Baptist of Jesus. Small Romanesque ruins. And now we come to Britain, Ireland, Scotland, and England. We have some small churches, very similar to the Templar Church in London, in that it's round with the chancel coming off. Priory in Ireland, very English looking structures, and later than the Middle Ages, of course, as well. Well, it says here that after suppressing the English and Irish priories a second time, Queen Elizabeth gave the palace of Clerkenwell to her master of the revels, and it was therefore here that Shakespeare's plays were licensed, and some of them acted. So the knights losing their property after the dissolution. And now we look at the German lands of Brandenburg and Bohemia, Hungary, Bavaria, and the giant German cathedrals and churches. Heidesheim. And again hit by the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Very nice southern German building there. And the Grand Bailiff, Johann von Schauenberg, in 1752. Part 3. The order becomes a charity. This is the plan of the hospital of Jerusalem in the 12th century, with the Church of St. John there, and St. Mary Magdalene, and St. Mary of the Latins. There's a little 12th century map. This is a plan of the hospital at Acre. So talking about their charitable ventures throughout the history classic in the 17th century. Grandmaster Manuel Pinto de Fonseca. Very serious looking but very authoritative figure. The Auberge of Castile, rebuilt by the Grandmaster Pinto. And there's the courtyard. Hospices were the stock and trade of the Hospitallers, hence the name. And this is Bailiff Johan van Vlaagslanden. A silver glove tray with the arms of the Grandmaster Pinto. And now we look at Malta on the eve of the French Revolution. And there's Valletta and the fortifications. The loss of Malta, May 1797. There's Valletta. Grandmaster Emmanuel de Rohan. Then we have some beautiful tapestries in the palace of the Grandmaster. Some portraits. Tsar Paul of Russia as Grand Master of the Order. So the Order did move to St. Petersburg in Russia at one point as well. And in modern times, 19th century, Rome and the resurgence or revival of the Order of St. John. The hospital ship Regina Margherita under the Order's flag in the Italian-Libyan War 1912. And the more modern endeavors during the First World War, where they ceased to become a military order and began to be an international charitable order. And here we have more modern grandmasters. And there is the hospital of the Order of Malta in Berlin, with the cross of St. John. And doing charity work in Vietnam. An ambulance boat on the Amazon. And that is the end of our book about the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Malta, and the Order of St. John. I hope you've enjoyed the paging sounds, the whispering, and looking at the pictures. Have a very relaxing and peaceful evening. Be good to yourself.